Bierwan, Kufon Vera, Black on Bertelich, Bienef Oftask, Fairly Avlingas, Inner Wesaþ. Wesaþ Hall, and welcome back to part 2 of this Wyrdwayz video about the Anglo-Saxon rune cane. Now, at the end of the last episode I was talking about Anglo-Saxon princes, and I'd like to continue where I left off and talk a bit more about the hall, the Mead Hall, the beoþ. Anyway, I'm still in this wood and it is absolutely freezing. So let's crack on. Now, when I read the Anglo-Saxon rune poem, to me it conjures up images of being in the Mead Hall with the prince in his magnificent, lavishly decorated hall, the flames flickering and dancing and catching on the metalwork. It conjures up a wonderful image to me. So now halls feature very prominently in early medieval life. Now, within literary works such as Beowulf, Njarl's saga, Egil's saga, we find abundant descriptions of these magnificent halls. What we know is that they are of great physical size. They were richly decorated and lavishly furnished. Now, it's obvious from both archaeological and literary sources that these places were important social settings. They're important settings for both social, political and religious gatherings. Without a doubt, the hall was a status symbol. Having a hall was a way of increasing your importance and your fame within your community and within the eyes of other men. It was definitely important for somebody in a position of power to have a hall in which they could welcome people, somewhere where their retainers could come and feast and drink, where there could be gift giving and receiving. Somewhere where tribute could be made from neighbours, somewhere where they could sit together and celebrate their victories and their conquests. This was an integral part of the community and the ideology. Now, halls were symbolic of power and importance. If you wanted somebody if you wanted a bard to write and sing songs about you and how important you were, well, you needed a hall that they could do this within. So really, how could a lord claim to rule if he didn't have a hall? You know, the hall was absolutely fundamental to the structure of Anglo-Saxon society. There's actually ample evidence within Anglo-Saxon society that the gathering together and the sharing of drink was important, not just for the rich people, but amongst all levels of society, as it pretty much still is today if we think about it. There's evidence in the story about caedmon of people gathering together to share drink and stories and songs. So this could be an informal gathering, which the Anglo-Saxons called a beoþ, or it could be the more formal drinking ritual, as in the sumbel that I spoke about in my poem about the Anglo-Saxon rune So here is an extract from the epic poem Beowulf, in which Hrothgar, the king of the Spear Danes, aware that his fame was not quite great enough, decides that the best thing to do would be to build a great hall to be named Heorot, which would increase his fame amongst men. So I shall read it to you first in Old English. Him on Mordbairn, that heel wretched heart and wulda, Meadowend Mitchell, men ye wachian, Thonna Uldabairn, Afra ye flunan, on fair on inan ila, Yela dalen, Youngum and oldum, Swilche him god selda, Booten Folkschara on de Ferlen Gumina, that each wieder ye flein, work ye banen. Maniger, Mithra, ye on Fusna, midden yed. Fulcher de Flatwan, him on first ye lump. Ardra mod uldum, that hit wolf aliero. Helana mast, shop him hiot namen. Saith that his wardas ye weld, weirder hafa. So that was lines 67 to 79 from Beowulf. Now I'm going to read it to you in modern English so you actually know what on earth I was on about. It came in his mind to bid his henchmen a hall uprear, a master mead house mightier far than ever was seen by the sons of earth. And within it then, to old and young, he would all allot that the Lord had sent him, save only the land and the lives of his men. Wide, I heard, was the work commanded for many a tribe this mid-earth round, to fashion the folkstead. It fell, as he ordered, in rapid achievement that ready it stood there. Of halls the noblest, Heorot, he named it, whose message had might in many a land. So once again we can hear from that poem that basically Hrothgar told his people to build it and they built it. That's how the hierarchical structure within the society worked. So is there any archaeological evidence for great halls such as Heorot, which is described in the epic poem? Now, in the first half of the 20th century, Britain had yielded absolutely no evidence at all for archaeologists of anything at all like a hall such as Heorot. Now, the archaeologists, they became jaded as such magnificent structures as the hall of the King of the Spear Danes appeared in Scandinavia. Indeed, these great halls were being found in Scandinavia, but not in Britain. Now, this actually led to the Council for British Archaeology in 1948 describing the inhabitants of Anglo-Saxon England as, for the most part, in a culturally primitive condition. Now, they then went on to say, a rectangular scraping in the ground with wattle walls and a thatched roof seemed to have been the limit of their known architectural competence. So all in all, it was all pretty disappointing. Nothing that could possibly resemble the great halls of the epic poems were being found in Britain. But luckily this changed later in the 20th century when certain sites were discovered with remains of halls that certainly could seem to rival those described within the sagas and poems. For example, there was one at Cheddar in Somerset, which is a later one, post-conversion. Yeavering in Northumbria, which we'll talk about a bit more, and Cowdery's Den in Hampshire. Now, some of the academics, they actually believe that one possible function of these halls was as a theatre for religious ceremonies, which is very interesting. Now I'm going to go back now to the Anglo-Saxon dictionary, because I can, and tell you about the word hof, which you've probably heard of. Now actually, in the Anglo-Saxon dictionary, the definition of this word is enclosure, court, dwelling, building, house, hall, temple or sanctuary. So quite a broad range of meanings there when you look up the definition of the word hof. Now, in the early 20th century, it was supposed that a hof was a temple, a separate building, completely separate from secular life, reserved purely for religious ceremony. Pretty much like a church is today. However, the archaeological evidence for these hofs, these temples, was very scant indeed. Now, it was assumed that the reason for this lack of evidence of hof buildings was the fact that the sacred ground was then reused and later Christian churches built on the old pagan sites. And there are examples of this happening, of course. So in 1966, after having studied many texts, Olsen concluded that there was in fact no evidence to suggest that early medieval people, or even early medieval people, had separate buildings for religious purposes. In other words, he concluded that there were no buildings that were solely used as temples. And he actually proposed that the definition of a hof should be a farm where cult meetings were held for more people than those living there, and therefore that a hof was in fact a hall. So what this means is in fact that the hall was a multifunctional building where cultic activities and rituals took place, as well as other non-religious, social and political occasions. So this draws me back to what I was saying earlier about the elite people within society and this hierarchical ideology. Now, there must have been a reason why religious culting activities were taking place within the hall. And it was no doubt one with ideo-political objectives. Now, why do I say this? If you think about the power that the church held post-conversion and into later medieval times, it was a massive amount of power. So I think that we can conclude that someone in a position of religious importance holds a great amount of power. Think how religion has been used to control people through the ages. Religion can be used to control the masses. How many wars have been fought in the name of religion? I honestly don't know, but it must be loads. So basically, for the hall owner, the elite person, the lord and or the lady, it made perfect sense for them to encompass this role and for them to attend to both for the spiritual, the societal and the political needs of their people. So the lord and the lady were without a doubt at the very epicentre of their community. Life revolved around them. So what better way to firmly cement their position and power than to use all the possible ways to secure that elite status? And of course, it's cold. As I was saying earlier, this is all part of the hierarchical ideology. Now, the esoteric control what it does is it helps to firmly cement their position as elite leaders. With this in their arsenal, well, it's a powerful weapon. It's a powerful weapon. If they're controlling religion, politics, and society, then basically they've got the whole package. They've got the whole package all wrapped up in one. So the hall becomes the focus of all of these activities under one roof, led by one leader. So we can imagine the hall changing its purpose. It was a fluid process, so the hall's purpose would change according to the needs, whether they be social needs, political needs, or religious needs. So throughout the course of the year, with the different religious festivals, you would see the hall changing to suit those needs. Oh, it's so cold. So I want you to imagine the leader of the community. So one night they may be in their hall, leading a religious ceremony, making a blot, a sacrifice to the gods, to ask for protection and wealth and prosperity and fertility for the community. This is a powerful position to have. And this, long after the ceremony has ended, the image of this person in this very powerful and magical role would be forever ingrained upon the memory of the members of the community. And then the next day, of course, they would see this person back in normal society, perhaps, tending to the farm work or doing whatever was needed as part of that community. Of course, as I said, that memory of them in that religious cultic role would forever linger on and would give them a certain amount of power and control over that community. So I want to now have a look in more detail of one of the halls that were excavated in the second half of the 20th century in this country, and that's the place known as Wyrdwayz in Northumbria. Now, Jenny Walker looked at this site in some detail in her paper and concluded that the plans of Wyrdwayz are in fact good enough to make meaningful statements about how ritual, whether that be socio-political or religious, may have been organised within this space. Now let's talk a little bit about Wyrdwayz. So the site was begun, the Anglo-Saxon site, because it is actually on an older site, but the Anglo-Saxon buildings were begun in the 6th century and continued into the 7th century. So this is a site that was originally pagan and was then later Christian after the conversion. This site was known as Ad Gefrin by the Venerable Bede. I can't talk today. The Venerable Bede, that's better. So I want to look at one of the halls that were found in this excavation, the hall that the archaeologists named A2. Now this was a large hall. It was 82 by 36 feet. Now it was divided into 3 chambers, a large central chamber that was accessed by 2 external doors on the long walls. Now there were also smaller doors that then went into 2 other chambers. So there was a small chamber, a large chamber and another small chamber. Now these, the 2 small chambers at the outside, they were accessed from the outside by doors in the gabled ends. I hope you're with me. Now the archaeologists noted that the aisles allowed for a large open area in the middle of the central chamber. Now in his 1977 book entitled Wyrdwayz, an Anglo-British centre of early Northumbria. Hope Taylor, the archaeologist, states that this is where the hearth would have been, which of course makes total sense to have the hearth in a large central area in the middle of the hall. Now, if you want to know more about this site, then Hope Taylor's book is extremely comprehensive and is available online as a PDF. Now, this book also states that the arrangement of posts indicated a chair or throne flanked by tall posts. So this is interesting. This area is clearly set up for some kind of purpose to put the elite person in the centre of the hall on a raised throne. Now, in her paper, Jenny Walker argues that the hall would be structured by the performance of its users, and the performance in turn would be structured by the hall. Now, basically, I'm going to show you a drawing. Now, what you can see from this drawing is that the way that the space was set up, the architecture would control the flow of people into this space. So it could very easily be used to allow a processional route to the high chair. People could very much be controlled by the... Ah, raven. That's nice. Oh, another one. So people could very much be controlled. The flow and the movement of people within this hall could very easily be controlled by the architecture of the hall, and also access. People would be able to access the space from different ways. You know, what were the smaller chambers used for? Were these more sacred areas? Were they for specific purposes? Of course, we'll never know, but by looking at the plan, you can see how this space could have been very easily set up for religious performances. Without a doubt, the spatial organisation of this Hall A2 does allow for the hierarchical performance of ritual activities. And this is interesting. The hall clearly supported and strengthened the religious socio-political power of the elite person in charge. So thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Wyrdwayz. It's great to see the subscription numbers going up. So if you like this video, please subscribe. It really does mean the world to me. Don't forget, Wyrdwayz is on Instagram and also on Facebook, and I also have a Patreon account if you wanted to support the work and help pay for fake blood and other things. So thank you again for joining me. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about some of the other functions of the meduseld, the Mead Hall, the beoþ, and some of the other ways that it was used within Anglo-Saxon society. So do join me for that. And you take care, keep warm, and I will see you soon. Okay, hale.